that people who believe in God get better faster, and that the recovery is more durable than people who do not. And that, for me, was the most impactful thing he could say at that time, and much more impactful than if he said that he had proven the existence of a God, because I would not have believed that. But this observation that
At that time, you were not at that. So you're raised Catholic. At that time,
but,
agnostic. I was raised Catholic, and so when I was about 18 or 20, I was agnostic. So is that where you kind of were at around the same time then?
I wouldn't say agnostic, because I had a good experience with the Catholic faith my whole life. I never was, I never had problems with priests or nuns. I had only good experiences. I admire these people, and I had bought into it, and there was no trauma for me that moved me away from the faith. But when you're living against conscience,
Yeah.
you move God to the periphery of your life and of your consciousness. And so God had gotten smaller and smaller, and any concept of a God that, was intervening on my day-to-day life and was meaningful or watching over me, or, was not, that was gone from my life. If you had asked me, do I believe in God at that time, I'd say yes, but I would not have, it wouldn't have been kind of a personal God that was directly in my life. So I didn't see any evidence of that.
Yeah.
But I decided at that time, but it was impactful on me, because what he was saying is that whether there's a God or not, if you believe in one, that your chance of recovery are better, and recovery, that path to recovery and freedom from the compulsion is going to be faster, easier. And at that point, I'd already made a resolution to myself that anything that I could do would improve my chance of recovery by even 1%, that I was going to do. So I made an intellectual decision. I'm going to start believing in God. I'm going to be, a
Wow.
person.
Hello, and welcome to another exclusive interview by Recovery Today magazine. We're first and foremost, we're a magazine whether you're considering addiction recovery for yourself or loved one, maybe you're actively in recovery a short time, maybe it's been many, many years, you're going to find all kinds of topics related to addiction, recovery, and really living a happy, successful life at Recovery Today. I'm Rob Hamby, I'm the editor-in-chief of Recovery Today. And as usual, we have amazing guests. This one I am particularly honored and humbled to introduce, although he really needs no introduction at all. He is from one of the most prominent, known, beloved families in American history, modern American history at least. He's an environmental lawyer, he's a best-selling author, he's a political writer, founder of the Children's Self-Defense Fund, and perhaps the next president of the United States, the first one that I know of that is in active long-term recovery. My guest today, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Robert, thank you for taking some time to jump on.
Thanks for having me, Rob. I'm looking forward to talking.
Absolutely. Well, as I was telling you pre-roll, we've covered so many different celebrities and people of fame and stature, and I have liked everything that I've heard over the last few years, particularly as we dealt with the pandemic. I've heard you on many, many, many interviews. Everything that I have heard, I liked. Our lane, of course, at Recovery Today is recovery. We're not political. We're not religious. We don't talk about any of those kind of things because it doesn't serve the recovery community. But when my wife saw you on a town hall, a News Nation town hall, and you shared your story, immediately she said, "Oh my God, you have to interview, you have to interview Robert F. Kennedy Jr." So we're here. You had answered a question that somebody had asked about, I guess, to kind of tee things up a little bit about the opiate crisis. They stood up and they asked that, and that's where it came out. So I guess kind of to start, can you share with us some of your recovery story?
I got, first of all, I was, when I was a little kid, I took the pledge, which was a common ritual in Irish Catholic communities on the East Coast at that time, and I was raised on in kind of a primarily, my summers, which was a center point in my life because all my relatives, my 29 cousins, and ultimately 11 brothers and sisters, were all raised in the same town on Cape Cod, and it was an Irish Catholic community. We're half Irish Catholic, and a lot of us took the pledge when we were little as part of a ritual. You got a pledge pin,
Right.
Usually from Catholic school, and I think there was an understanding that our race was disproportionately vulnerable to this disease we call the Irish flu, and so I took that obligation seriously. And I never, by the time I was 15 years old, I never even tasted coffee. I had that. My dad was killed when I was 4, a year before. This was a summer of 1969, and I had the elder brother of a friend of mine was had been drafted to go to Vietnam and was having a going away party where the whole town came, and I was there. It turned into in the end to a melee, and the guy who was going to Vietnam ended up hitting some cops, and he went to jail instead of Vietnam. But I was hitchhiking home from that event, and an older boy picked me up and offered me a tab of LSD, and LSD, this was the summer of 1969, had come to Cape Cod that night, and I would not have taken it except that I read the comic books came to our town every Tuesday, and the kids my age all read the comics, and I read my favorite comic was a comic called Turok, Son of Stone, and it was about these two Indians. And I followed their adventures. But in the previous week, they had taken peyote or some other hallucinogen, and they had been transported in time, and they had seen dinosaurs. And I had even at that age, I had a deep interest in paleontology. And I asked the guy, "Well, if I take that, will I see dinosaurs?" And he said, "You might." And I took it, and I had a very, very intense very intense hallucinogenic trip. And a lot of people in my town had taken it that night for the first time. And it was really kind of a magical night. And I ended up in the neighboring town in the morning, but I was crashing at that point, and I was coming down, and I was at that point, very remorseful. And I felt like I had done, I had broken my vow. And I also was going to get in trouble when I got home because I had violated my curfew. My mother, was very tough. I say in my book, American Values, that she invented tough love. And I had to go home and face the music. And so I was walking home, getting increasingly dark. And just before I got home, I saw some boys in the woods, some older kids, and I went in there to see what they were up to. And I told them that I was crashing on this, on the acid, and they offered me. And the whole time I was saying to myself, I'm never going to do this again, no matter what. I'm never going to do it again. And then they offered me. They said, "Try some of this," and it was methadone. And I snorted it, and I felt great. And I tell that story because that was kind of the template for my addiction over the next 14 years of constantly trying to stop, making promises to myself, feeling bad and remorseful about it, and somehow not being able to was, as cunning, baffling, and powerful. I had iron willpower in other aspects of my life. I gave up candy for Lent when I was 13 years old or 12 years old, and never ate candy again until I was in college. And I gave up
Wow.
desserts for Lent. the following year, and I never ate another dessert until I was in freshman in college. And I was training for sports. I was playing rugby and trying to bulk up, and I felt like I could do anything with my willpower, and yet somehow this compulsion was impervious to my willpower. No matter what I did, I couldn't. And for me, the most demoralizing aspect of this disease was my incapacity to keep contracts with myself, and make myself a commitment, and then just not doing it, and that initiates this spiral of of self hatred, or lack of self respect. The deterioration of any kind of self esteem, because I didn't seem to have control over what I was doing, and I and then when I came into the program, I came into a rehab, and I was in 1983, September of 1983, and but the rehab that I went to was not a 12-step rehab. It was a rehab that taught you how to, after a year of abstinence, that you could do controlled drinking.
Okay.
That rehab I think, is closed down today. I don't think that system works well.
Good. Yeah.
I've never seen it work with anybody. But anyway, but when I was there, I knew that I knew that I did not want to. I knew I wanted to quit. I was absolutely determined never to take a drug again, but I didn't want to be a person who was out white knuckling it and feeling like that I wanted to take a drug, but I was just strong. I was going to apply my personal strength and willpower against it, and feeling all the time like I was missing something or wanted to do it. I wanted to be one of these people, like a normal person, who could get up in the morning and not be thinking about drugs all day. And so I knew that at that time, intuitively, that I had to have some profound spiritual realignment, that I kind of needed to change on some basic level who I was as a person, because I was an addict and I wanted to be something else. And I knew throughout history, I'd read the lives of the saints. I'd read, Augustine's life. I'd read St. Francis' life, and both of them had addiction problems in their youth, and with, drug and sexual acting out. And they had both walked away from that after having this profound spiritual awakening. Saul at Damascus was another example. But I had a friend who was the best friend of my brother, one of my two brothers, a brother who just died subsequently of this disease. But this friend used to take drugs the same way that we did, with the same compulsion, the same obsession, and he became a Mooney.
Well, I hadn't heard that one in a while, Moonies.
He became a follower of Reverend Sun Myung Moon.
Yeah.
And when that happened to him, he stopped taking drugs altogether, or alcohol, anything, and he would still hang out with us. But he had no, and he would watch us take drugs, but he had no desire to take them himself. And he would chatter about, his new interest in this religion a lot. But he seemed completely immune to the impulses that had once consumed him. And when I first went into the rehab, and I would think about this guy, and, I was narrow-minded and judgmental about what he'd done at that point. And I used to say to myself, well, I'd rather be dead than be a Mooney, but I wish somehow I could distill whatever power it was, or whatever, whatever force it was that allowed and that gave him, that anointed him with this immunity to this compulsion. without becoming a religious nuisance. And at that point, I read an article, and you tell me if I'm going on too long.
No, not at all. Keep rolling. Good. You're good.
I picked up an article I picked up a book by Carl Jung, and somebody had left, and it was just an act of synchronicity that somebody left it on a table somewhere. I have no idea why, and I happened to see it. The book's name is Synchronicity, and the reason I picked it up is because the Police had just come out with an album by that name, and I didn't know what the word meant, and so I was curious about it, and I picked it up and I read the book. And that book, Jung was a contemporary of Freud's, and he was one of the fathers of modern psychiatry and psychotherapy. He also played a critical role in crafting the spiritual dimensions of the big book. And he's mentioned in the big book. And Bill Wilson had a friend whose name was Roland Hazard, who was one of his closest friends. He was a Boston businessman. And he had gone over and he was an alcoholic, a hopeless alcoholic, but a very, very successful man. And he would get sober for short periods of time and make millions. And then he would get drunk and lose them. And he went over to Jung's sanitarium. Jung ran the biggest sanitarium in Europe, in Zurich. And he went over there and he got cured. Oh, he came out and he felt totally confident that he would never drink again after engaging in this course of therapy from Jung. And yet, a month or two later, he was back on the sauce again, and he went back to Jung and he said, is there any hope for somebody who has this disease as bad as I do? And Jung said, and he said to Jung, I want you to tell me, break it to me straight. And Jung said, okay, it's hopeless. There is no hope for people like you. And Hazard then pressed him, and he said, has it ever happened? And Jung said, yes. He said, the only way that somebody without the disease of alcoholism at your level, the only hope for them is a profound spiritual experience or realignment.
Yeah.
And he says it has happened with that. And that, Hazard told that story to Bill. And Bill at that time was involved already in the Oxford group, which was an 8-step program that was supposed to free you from alcoholism. And the purpose of those 8 steps was to induce a spiritual awakening. And so Bill Wilson ended up having this really kind of extraordinary correspondence with Carl Jung. And as I said, Carl Jung played an important role in crafting his vision, Wilson's vision of the spiritual dimension of this program. But Jung had this experience whereas Freud was an avowed atheist, and Freud was his mentor, and they ended up breaking over the kind of the spiritual approaches to AA, because Jung was the opposite of that. His father had been a preacher. Interestingly, his father was a very conventional preacher, a very brilliant man, but his father never had an authentic spiritual experience and died a miserable man, having lost all of his faith at the end of his life. Jung, in contrast, had profound and rich spiritual experiences that began when he was 3 years old. And mainly, he was at this relationship to God that came to him in the form of dreams, but also other experiences. But if people want to read about Jung, I would not recommend they read Synchronicity.
Okay.
I would recommend that they read his biography, which I think is called Memories, Dreams, and something. But but the biography is an extraordinary book and really fun to read or to listen to on tape. But anyway, what he talks about in this book, Synchronicity, he has this experience where he's sitting on the third floor of his sanitarium with a female patient, and she was describing a dream that she had, and the fulcrum of that dream is a scarab beetle. A scarab beetle is this very potent spiritual iconography that is a common figurine in the hieroglyphics on the tombs of Egypt and the obelisks, etc. But it's a creature that really doesn't exist in Northern Europe. And while he's talking to her, he's hearing this bing, bing, bing on the window behind him. And it's irritating him, but he does not want to turn and take his attention off his patient. Finally, he stands up in exasperation. He throws open the window, and a scarab beetle flies in and lands in his palm. And he turns to her and he holds it to her and he said, "Is this what you were dreaming about?" And he called that kind of experience, that kind of conspiracy he called that of coincidences. He called that synchronicity. Synchronicity is something that people, when they first get sober, almost everybody has these extraordinary experiences. A typical one would be, you're talking about somebody who you haven't thought about in 20 years, and the phone rings, and it's that person. And when people first get sober in the 12-step program, they start to notice almost everybody starts to notice these things happening, these little acts of synchronicity. And that incident prompted Jung to start thinking about that in terms of spirituality. And, he understood that the chances of that happening were 1 in a trillion. They were impossible. And in other words, it violated the laws of mathematics, which is the natural law, a probability of mathematics and physics, whatever, and of nature.
Yeah, it's impossible.
A creature didn't belong there, so it violated all the laws of nature. And what he started thinking of synchronicity as an incident where God breaks his own rules and intervenes, reaches into the universe to kind of tap him on the shoulder and say, I'm here, and I can break the rules when I need to.
Yeah.
And I'm watching over things. So, Jung was he was a deeply spiritual man, but he was also a very faithful scientist. And so what he decided to do was try to reproduce that phenomena in a clinical setting. And he would put one guy in one room and another guy in another room and have them flip cards and then look at what the other one,
quantum physics we do today.
Well, they would guess what the other guy had done, and he felt like if he could beat the laws of percentages or chance of mathematics, that he would have proven the existence of a supernatural and a law that was not, part we consider natural laws. And that was the first step to proving the existence of a God. But in this book, he says that he never succeeded in doing it. But he does say this. He said, although I cannot use empirical tools and scientific tools to prove the existence of a God, I can prove that based upon case studies and seeing thousands and thousands of anecdotal evidence of having seen thousands of patients come through the sanitarium, that people who believe in God get better faster and that the recovery is more durable than people who do not. And that, for me, was the most impactful thing he could say at that time, and much more impactful than if he said that he had proven the existence of a God, because I would not have believed that. But this observation that...
At that time, you were not, so you're raised Catholic. At that time, agnostic. I was raised Catholic, and so when I was about 18 or 20, I was agnostic. So is that where you kind of were around the same time then?
I wouldn't say agnostic, because I had a good experience with the Catholic faith my whole life. I never was, I never had problems with priests or nuns. I had only good experiences. I admire these people, and I had bought into it, and there was no trauma for me that moved me away from the faith. But when you're living against conscience,
Yeah.
you move God to the periphery of your life and of your consciousness. And so God had gotten smaller and smaller, and any concept of a God that, was intervening on my day-to-day life and was meaningful or watching over me or, was not, that was gone from my life. If you had asked me, do I believe in God at that time, I'd say yes, but I would not have, it wouldn't have been kind of a personal God that was directly like. So I didn't see any evidence of that.
Yeah.
But I decided at that time, but it was impactful on me because what he was saying is that whether there's a God or not, if you believe in one, that your chance of recovery are better, and recovery, that path to recovery and freedom from the compulsion is going to be faster, easier. And at that point, I'd already made a resolution to myself that anything that I could do that would improve my chance of recovery by even 1%, that I was going to do. So I made an intellectual decision. I'm going to start believing in God. I'm going to be, a
Wow.
person. And I also did not want to become like a religious nuisance, as I said.
Mooney. You didn't want to be a Mooney.
Then the question is, how do you start believing in something that you can't see or smell or hear or feel or touch or acquire with your senses? And Young had answered that question in this book because he essentially said, fake it till you make it. You act as if you pretend that you're somebody who does believe in God and act accordingly, and that the obedience, the compliance to that vision will precede the actual evidence that will come into your life eventually. But the obedience has to come first. So it's a paradox. And that paradox is called faith, because you've got to obey before you see.
Yeah.
And so I just started doing that. I started acting as if there was a God up there watching me all the time, and that life was kind of a series of tests, and that I had to behave myself in an admirable way, even when I didn't have an audience, because I now had a permanent audience, which was God. So, I started breaking my days down into like 30 or 40 different decisions. And I invested each one of those decisions with a moral dimension. So for example, when the alarm goes off in the morning, do I lay in bed for an extra 10 minutes with indolent thoughts, or do I get right up? Do I make the bed? That's the most important decision for me. It became the most important thing I did every day. Make the bed, what the rush was. And do all the other things that I'm supposed to do, like brush my teeth and, hang up the towels after I take a shower, not leave a mess, in the bathroom. Do I put the water back in the ice tray before I put the ice tray in the freezer? Do I put, when I reach into the closet and pull out one of those wire hangers, my blue jeans and all the wire hangers fall on the floor, do I go back and hang them up, or do I do what I used to do, which is to say, that's not my job. That I'm too busy and important for that job. That's somebody else.
I'll get it later.
I get it later. Do I put the shopping cart back in the place where the shopping cart's supposed to go, or do I leave it in the parking lot? About a couple months after I got sober, I was.
First of all, I have to ask, because I didn't spotlight it. I didn't spotlight this. So I'm fascinated by, I had no idea about Young. I love Young, had no idea about that. But one of the things to get right to it is you have 40 years of sobriety, 40. And I heard you say that you go to 9 meetings a week, which is, I don't want to but I have to spotlight that, because that's I'm 29. I don't meet that many people that have more than me generally. And that's
I want to say this, that in 2000, around 2009, I had 25 years of sobriety, and I had a bunch of things happened to me that year, which but including a couple of surgeries. And one day I took more pills than I was supposed to take. And around that time, I started counting days again. So I don't consider myself to have 40 years of continuous sobriety. I had to start, counting again.
even more.
I've been going to meetings for 40 years steadily. And I've gone to, I don't know, I've gone to over 10,000 meetings. So I've heard a lot of stories, and I've thought a lot about it. And I go to a lot of meetings now because, I haven't had a compulsion or obsession or thought of ever taking a drug, but my life just goes better. I stay connected spiritually, and it's, what my inclination, like everybody else is, I think, is that when my life starts getting bigger again and the crisis is over and the cash and prizes start coming into my life, my inclination is to say to God, thank you, I got it from here, and then take the wheel and drive the car off.
Same. I do the same.
I think the big challenge of sobriety is how do you stay in that posture of surrender, even with God controlling your life rather than self-will, even when everything's going well and everything in your life is telling you you're great, you're a big shot, all of this. And how do you stay humble at that point? Because, if you don't stay humble is when you stay in that posture of surrender. Humiliation is when, God needs to teach you a lesson. And, it's better to learn the lesson yourself and stay always. And so much about addiction is about abuse of power.
Yeah.
Abusing whatever power. All of us have some power, whether it's good looks or whether it's connections or whether it's education or whatever, or physical strength or athletic ability or whatever.
Yeah.
And are you using that power to serve your own self-will, or are you using it to serve God and your community? And the trick is, is how do you keep that power aligned with a spiritual purpose, even when everything in your life is telling you you don't need God anymore in your life. So that to me is a lot. Now, I don't know, my life started getting big. Addiction makes your life very, very small. We all end up alone, and our lives get tiny. But my life started getting big very, very quickly after I got sober. And I was, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks out, I was running through I was running through National Airport in Washington, D.C., trying to catch a plane that was mission critical that I be on that plane. I was going to miss it. I was late and I had to be on it, or some terrible consequence was going to happen that I don't even recall today. But I was running through that airport. I was balling up. I was taking a stick of Dentyne and put it in my mouth, and then I rolled up the wrapper and I threw it into a trash can as I passed, and it went perfectly swish right into the center of the trash can. But as I was running past, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it pop back out again. It must have hit something in there. But I said to myself, without, that's God's fault because I made the shot. And I kept running, but it started eating at me, and about, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 feet beyond that trash can.
Put it around and went back and picked the aluminum up.
I went back and put it back in. And that, to me, I did end up making the plane. But for me, the most important thing I did that day was to put that gum wrapper back in, because that was my, act of surrender.
How did you find yourself? How did you find your way into the rooms then? It was because I've never heard anybody say that they've made a cerebral decision like, a thoughtful decision, like, okay, I don't, I really want to intentionally develop my God, but like you're, I assume, because we're talking about meetings and things like that, more of a traditional 12 step. There's non 12 step and holistic, and there's psychedelics, and there's all kinds of things like that. How did you find your way into the rooms, and what was the, one of the things I guess I projected or assumed is trauma is the most, what everybody that everybody seems to agree, everybody I've talked to, you will say trauma is the underlying issue. And then I look at your life, just knowing you only from interviews and things like that, and your family. And I think probably one of the most public and traumatic, visions that I guess I'll say this way, that we have in American history with your uncle and then with your father. And I'm thinking, okay, you're 10 when, losing your uncle, I'll say losing instead of being so visceral. And then you're 14 with your father, which is about this LSD time, and the country's experiencing trauma. I can't imagine the trauma that you're experiencing, because even if you're not a Kennedy, if you're just faint like a regular person, I asked my own son, imagine if your uncle and then me, what would happen? But you're in the public spotlight as well. And so I just kind of had this idea that this trauma was very unique, or how was that perhaps unique for you, or a contributing factor into what led to, I thought I heard in one of the interviews, like 14 years or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it really had anything to do with my addiction. It probably did at some level, but I feel like I was born, that I was born with like an empty hole inside of me. And I've heard enough people talk in meetings, over the years, who just say, I had no trauma in my life and I was born an addict. And I feel like that's the way it was with me. I think no matter what happened to me, I was going to be, that I was headed for addiction. I feel like I was born with a big hole inside of me. That I remember when I was a little kid, that I had that kind of gnawing anxiety, and that like an emptiness. And that, when I finally found, for me, the drug of choice was heroin, my progression was very fast, because really 6 weeks after I did that, at LSD, I was injecting heroin. One thing is I don't have a lot of the boundaries that normal people have of fear, and trepidation. So I was willing to kind of try anything. And it was a very, very fast progression for me. But for me, I don't blame anything or anybody for my addiction. I feel like this is the way that I am. And it really doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter, because you don't have any control over what the past was. All of that is essentially, even if you had a horrible, horrible past, you have to look at it as a gift, and and make the best of it. And you were all given two lives, one that God gives us and our parents, and the other one that we make up for ourselves, and that's the one we're responsible for. And I feel like whatever caused my addiction, whatever made me the way I am, that's what I have to deal with today. And the only thing I have control over is way I behave today, the way I conduct myself, the choice I make. I have no control over the past. And I heard very early on in this program that, you can look at the past, but don't stare at it. The only thing that matters is the way that you can die. And I've have friends who have experienced like horrific trauma, sexual abuse when they were kids by people they trusted, and trauma that I feel is much worse than mine. And that have completely come to peace with that, are at peace with that, are looking at it with forgiveness, with gratitude, and everything else, and have escaped the power of those traumatic events. And I think that's what we all have to do anyway. That you can't afford to live with resentment. If you're an addict, Resentment is like swallowing poison and hoping someone else will die. And
All we can do is look, all we can do is make amends to the best of our ability, to be honest and truthful, to operate with integrity. I'm very big about my word. If I say something, I do it. I make my bed. Also, all of these different things just so I can complete tasks and try to build up momentum, because I know that it's dopamine that I need. But I'm in alignment with with all of that. The thing that's a little bit different with you, not a little bit, but a lot different with you, is sometimes I will ask people as part of questions to get to know them a little bit. Like, imagine that you were the king of the world, or that you were the president or something. What would you do about this? What would you do about that? And the thing is you could be. So I loved, if it's okay to kind of transition over into a little bit. And first of all, thank you for sharing as much as you have as on your own personal story. I want to acknowledge that. But I am so curious. One of the things that struck me, and I'd like to ask you some of these, like if you were the president type of questions, because I think it's what everybody so much wants to know. I did want to connect everybody personally with you and your own story of redemption. But you talked a lot about, or a decent amount that I heard about, this cool concept called healing farms. And I wondered if you would expand on that. And then I got a whole bunch of other questions I wanted to ask you too about different interesting things. But please tell us a little bit about this concept of healing farms. What are they? Where are they? What inspired you to kind of come up with this idea, if you will?
yeah, I had a relative who I was trying to find a place where who was not, the traditional rehabs that who had been through to some traditional rehabs in this country and was not working for her. And she had some, let's say, co-variables beside, dual diagnosis issues, side addiction, and that was making recovery impossible for her in the traditional model. And I started looking around the world, and I was very worried, and a lot of people were worried that this person was going to end up, either in jail or through, or worse. And I was thinking, back in the old days, what did they do with a girl like this? They sent her to a nunnery, and, and where you were confined, where you had this very rigid kind of environment and strictures, and people flourished under those conditions, and where your life was given kind of to obedience and service to others. And, a lot of those people, those women turned out, had incredibly enriching lives. And I thought, is there anything like that anymore? And I started looking around the world, and I found this place called San Patrignano in Italy, in Rimini, which is near Bologna. And it's a farm of many thousands of acres, but it has vineyards on it. It has and there's 2,000 kids who live there.
Wow.
And they're trained in skills, and they do organic farming, and they make their own food, and their food is incredible. Everybody works, everybody makes a meal. There's no cell phones or screens allowed, and people talk to each other in the old-fashioned way. When they have time off, they do a lot of walking and talking with each other, and they have a vineyard that makes some of the best wine in Italy. They have a famous bakery that makes some of the best bread. They have a furniture outlet that makes high-end furniture. They have a hand-painted wallpaper factory that is, sells its products all over the world, high-end stuff. They make purses. They have apparel, and, a purse, and they make purses, other accoutrements or accessories for Prada, for De La Valle, for Gucci. And the people who come out of there are all placed in jobs. The only requirement for going there is that you make a 4 or 5 year commitment. And it's people who just cannot get help any other way. they're not, that 12-step programs aren't working for them, and the conventional rehabs aren't. And they go there, and it's absolutely free. Oh no, but they don't even allow you to make a contribution if you're the family member or whatever. And they're basically self-sufficient. I went and visited it many times, was really inspired by it. And I'm going to take, as president, I'm going to take that model or some version of it and transplant it to this country, to rural areas across this country, because we have so many people who, we have, first of all, so much mental illness. Now, 30% of Americans have been treated for depression. Our country is deteriorating, and the mental illness is overtaking our entire generation of children, up to 30, 40 years old. We have 35% of Americans been treated for mental illness. 17% are on psychiatric drugs now being treated. So that's 1 in every 6.
17% right now, 17% at any given time are on psychiatric drugs right now.
It's 120 prescriptions for SSRIs a year, 120 million prescriptions for benzos.
That's big money for somebody, isn't it?
And about 118 million in ADD and ADHD medication. That's, Adderall, Ritalin, Concerta, that class of drugs. So that is a prescription for more than 1 prescription per capita for every individual in this country. There's no other country in the world that has a mental health crisis like this. Even the countries that are, in eternal wars are not dealing with this kind of mental health crisis. Something is really wrong with our country, and we need to, instead of looking for new wars, because war is part of it. A lot of these people are coming back PTSD. I'm fighting. If you're a black kid or an Hispanic kid in a poor neighborhood in this country, there's only a couple ways out. If you can't get into the NBA or the NFL, or you're not a really gifted musician, really the only legitimate path out is the military. And the military takes good care of you. You have, you get insurance, you get housing, you get education. But the catch is that you have to go and kill people, and they're training you in violence to kill people. And that,
no bodily autonomy anymore either. You can't do, that's not part of it either now.
There's a lot of problems with that model, and we ought to be able to do that. We ought to be able to get those benefits by doing service for our communities without having to kill people. So
the healing farms will be.
We do. We put in rural areas, grow good food, because that's part of the problem. People are eating poison food that's contributing to the mental illness crisis and the obesity crisis. I mean, corn syrup and processed foods are poison to humanity. And you look what they're doing to our country, and obesity is also a formula for mental health problems. And you're not going to feel good about yourself if you're not physically feeling good.
Yeah.
And we need to restore the health to the people in our country. So this is going to be my Peace Corps project. It's going to be restoring, making these healing centers all over our country, funding private groups to do these kind of centers, and making them free for people. So if this year we got 106,000 Americans dead from fentanyl.
Yeah, and last year and the year before, like every year, 100,000 people needlessly die. Yeah.
Yeah, and we, during the Vietnam War killed 56,000 Americans in 20 years, and that was a trauma for our country. Well, we're killing twice that many every year from fentanyl. And I lost a niece during the pandemic. Another niece became a quadriplegic during the pandemic, directly linked to the fentanyl epidemic and drug addiction. my family, I've lost my brother to this disease, and many, many other close hundred relatives.
It really pisses me off. It makes me really angry about it because it's so needless. So I had my fentanyl question was one of the questions I was going to ask you. So since you brought that up, and I love the whole idea of the healing farms. So we're going to grow good food. It'll subsidize itself that way and other means, federally, etc. But I assume, on fentanyl, one of the questions that I had about that was punishment. So we have, I was thinking about this today. I'm like, okay, let's say that a guy is caught, somebody, however he gets caught, and he's got 300 pounds of fertilizer in his back bedroom. And, whatever else is needed for this demonic, whatever that ammonia or whatever it would be, like Oklahoma City. So, we would label them with the T word. I have no idea what will be, I don't want to have any of this be censored or anything like that based on, but there's crimes that are far and above. And now you got a guy that's got enough fentanyl to kill 3 million people. Does he just go to jail for 10 years? Or does he get a trip to Gitmo or something like that? I mean, Trump is even talking about he says, over in China, they execute them publicly and stuff. But I mean, what do we do? Should we label these guys terrorists? I think we're literally at war. That's what I literally think we're at war now.
Yeah, for those large amounts, and you can't stop the, I'm going to change the border policy to make it so that it's very, very hard to cross the border, because right now the Mexican drug cartels are controlling immigration into this country, and they've created this humanitarian crisis. I went and interviewed people who've been abused, extorted, exploited, raped, beaten, and robbed by the cartels. And what's happening at the border, it is intolerable for our country. But we can never stop the fentanyl, because fentanyl is so, the molecule is so powerful, and like nothing else. I think it's 200 times as powerful as opiate.
Yeah,
you can put enough fentanyl in a briefcase to addict the entire city of Los Angeles. So there's no way to stop it from coming across. The Chinese are.
That's what it comes from.
Chinese and Mexican cartels are making the material themselves. And there's things that we can do to pressure Mexico and China to stop doing that. But yeah, we need punishment for people in this country who are selling large quantities of it. And then, people who are addicted to it should not be part of the war on drugs.
Oh, of course not. Absolutely not. No.
A quarter to a third of the people in our prisons now are there for nonviolent drug offenses, and we should be offering them rehabilitation. We should be offering them the ability to change their lives and leave the drugs behind, and that should be the first route of the first option for people. But we can't do that now because there's no place to send people.
No, there's not. And like I said, the more that I hear you talk about things, I'm like, that's a good plan. That's a good plan. I like that. It makes sense to me. I think that the border crisis is, it's a humanitarian crisis. Personally, my personal opinion, I think it's engineered and it's on purpose. I don't know exactly why, but I'm struck by, first of all, one of the things I had that I really wanted to ask you was, and you hit on it earlier, is you said that fear is not something that has factored in. You just, boldly do things. And I'm struck, man, because it seems like you have just big ones. And the things, because the people that you're speaking against, like what I'm hearing, we shouldn't have wars. Well, there's big money. There's 17% are addicted, are on prescriptions right now, or 34%. Well, there's big money. There's big money in illicit drugs. There's big money in fighting drugs. And I'm just struck by the courage that you have to say the things in your particular instance. It blows me away. And then even I read the other day, they turned you down for Secret Service. Where does this courage that you have come from?
I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know.
I mean, you live a good life.
I don't think it's not always a good thing because I lack, it's probably whatever gene, it's probably a genetic thing. I think it's a genetic thing because there's been a lot of, risk taking in my family. So it's not always, I'm not like bragging about it. I'm just saying it is, it's something that I think is like in my family is that, we're not, risk averse on both sides of my family. My mother,
Disdain for the injustice, then? Is it disdain for the injustice and like, if no one will speak up, I will speak up. Ask not what you can do, with your country. Is it kind of from this kind of a whole vibe of like your family?
well, this is a different question. I mean, that question is why do I, why am I doing what I'm doing now? And that is, yeah, I just feel like I'm, I'm trying to do the next right thing, and right now I'm in a unique position. I see the direction the country's going in. I think it's and the direction my political party's going in.
Yeah.
Toward wars and censorship, putting this group, the neocons, who are the people who engineered the Iraq War, putting them in charge of our foreign policy is not a good idea. And that, we're making a war on the middle class in this country, and the priorities that we have right now in the government do not reflect the needs and priorities of the American people. Or, the middle class in this country is just getting hammered. And part of that hammering is these forever wars, just paying for $113 billion for the Ukraine at the same month, March. We topped that off. We cut $113 billion from food stamps. And there's, 30 million Americans had their food stamps cut by 90% from $283 a month to $23 a month. And you can't feed yourself on $23. You can't even feed yourself on $230 a month, except for poison food. You can't have really nutritious food. That much money, and $23 a month, will barely get you through a day. And people in this country are living at a level of desperation. They're having to make these terrible choices, having to listen to the baby crying in the room next door and having to wonder whether that baby is $300 sick or $400 or $500 sick before you bring them to a hospital, having to choose between medicine and food, having to make terrible or gasoline for your car. Having to see what my wife said this the other day, that terror when she was poor, the terror that would afflict her when she saw the engine light come on in her car. And she knew she was going to have to make a choice between feeding herself and paying a mechanic. And, Americans shouldn't be we're the richest country in the world. We should not be having to make those choices. And the people in the middle class in this country, there's a system that is designed to strip mine the middle class of its equity, of its wealth, and transfer that to the super rich. And, the COVID lockdown was the last straw. We closed 3.3 million businesses, all the small businesses. We train people to shop on Amazon, and Jeff Bezos increased his wealth by 40%.
Yeah.
You're the billionaire. We created a billionaire a day during the pandemic. A billionaire a day, 500 days, 500 new billionaires, and we took $4 trillion from the American middle class and we moved it to the super rich. It's the biggest transfer of wealth in human history. And, there's nothing left of the middle class in this country. I spent my time traveling in places like, Eastern Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, doing lawsuits, seeing the way that Americans are living today. And it's like people live, when I was in Latin America as a kid, they know the government's not listening to them. And they know that nobody cares. They know that nobody cares. And that's why, they vote for Donald Trump, because they, I don't even think they think that Donald Trump is going to help them, but they think he's telling them the truth about what's happened, about some itself. Look, he's not telling the truth about the things, about many things. He's telling an essential truth about how nobody cares about the poor in this country and the middle class. And he's willing to break things, and they just want things broken because they're so angry. And I see it. I understand that. And we've got to, harness those energies and that anger and turn it into something idealistic.
That comes into the future. Why? So how do we do that? When one of the things I love that you had said was you were talking about, everybody is so triggered today and we're so divided. And I don't know what it was. It was something like it was either you or somebody else to say, we talk to our enemies even about stuff. How is it that people can be so polarized that you're a racist or you're a xenophobe or you're a homophobe or you're a thisophobe, a thatophobe, and it's immediately like, I can't even talk to you at all. And, when I was growing up, people could be on both sides of the aisle. My opinion is there really isn't a both sides anymore. I think it's one aisle. And then I think there's like powers that be, that kind of make, kind of play with these two things. And the people are just kind of asleep is kind of what I think. But how do we begin to talk to each other again where we can start to heal this?
Well, I think, that's what I'm trying to do with my campaign, which is to, focus on the values that Americans have in common rather than, on these issues, these kind of really, in many times, trivial issues that are keeping us all apart and at each other's throats. And I believe it's purposeful. I believe that as long as we're fighting each other, that this group of elites within the Beltway in Washington and all of their allies, the military-industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industry, and these other industries can continue to rob us and strip mine us because we're not focusing on what they're doing. We're focusing on hating each other. And that, the first thing we need to do is to find some unity and peace with each other, and then focus on on the injustice that's happening on a larger level, on this, this purposeful, the commoditization of the American people, of our landscapes, of our children, by these, the forces of these apocalyptical forces of ignorance and greed that are, robbing us of everything.
Yeah. I have one. We've been talking for a little while. And first of all, I want to thank you now. I'll thank you again in another second as we completely wrap up. But I've really enjoyed this. And as I had said at the top, one of the objectives, even pre-roll and probably when we had started, was I want to connect you with people that are in the recovery community, as somebody that's actually in recovery. You'd be the first president, at least that I know of, that's in recovery. There's been other presidents. I think Trump had said that he was sober, that he'd never drank, saw his brother, so like that. But you're the first one that I know of that's in recovery, and people in recovery are a little bit different. So I wanted to, as we kind of crack the door a little bit with your own story, what things or topics or ideas do you have? And I'm getting a text, so we need to wrap up too. But what is important that you would want people in recovery to know about what's in your mind and what your plans are and how it factors in for them?
Well, I don't know, and it's kind of tricky, Rob, because I don't go to meetings and politics, and I really try to keep it. And there's a really important reason that people didn't, why the tradition of anonymity that was with the 12-step programs happened because people who started using their society to, for some service, business purposes or something, or, let's say with me, political advancement, immediately had karmic consequences.
Okay.
As their sobriety. So I don't think anybody should vote for me because I'm sober. Just very sober. I don't want your vote if that's the right way.
So, like, you understand things that other people don't understand. Like, I had all kinds of questions about, how about Narcan everywhere? How about this? How about that? There's things that you are uniquely qualified that you cannot deny that are important for the community. So I will evangelize it perhaps if you are not, because I've liked everything that you told me. I've liked all of it. I've heard different parts of your plans. And I don't want to get the full on hook here on everything because we spent a lot of time. So I want to just thank you again. It's been a real pleasure to spend time with you, to get your thoughts on these things. And I thank you again.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's been a joy being with you.
This has been another fun, enlightening, amazing interview with Recovery Today magazine. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and this is a wrap.